Alright, as you guys know, there's a lot of vocabulary. The vocabulary for the National Board Exam Study Guide from the conference is what I want to go over. The reason I want to go over it is because I think that just reading something is a good way to learn, but there's more than one way to learn. So I decided that reading it out loud is going to also be a great way to learn it, and then listening to it. The nice thing is once these videos are made, as I go along through the quarter, we'll be posting more. Not we, I will be. And then, hopefully we can go ahead and go and play them back and listen to them when you're doing things like your dishes or just trying to do other things at the same time, which always doesn't work, but it will definitely be a little bit of help. Also, after we finish the quarter, we'll be able to watch these videos and go over them before actually taking the national board exams. There are going to be several things that I will struggle with pronunciation. I will do my best to make that sound right. I'm going to use the computer a little bit to have it read it. It's not going to do much better than me, but we'll see what happens. So thanks for taking the time to watch my video and listen to me read vocabulary. We're starting out on page 10, and we're going to be covering funeral directing in the glossary section for what we're doing. So we're going to start out. I apologize if I'm not looking at the camera because I'm reading a book. So, acknowledgement cards. Cards of recognition sent to friends for kindness shown to a deceased's family. These are the cards that people could write a note on. Accolade, an altar attendant. Adapted funeral rite. A funeral rite that is adjusted to the needs and wants of those directly involved, one which has been altered to suit the trends of the times. Aftercare, post-funeral follow-up. Those appropriate and helpful acts of counseling that come after the funeral. Allah, in Islam's faith, the name of the God. That was Allah, Islam. Altar, an elevated place of structure on which sacrifices are offered or at which religious rites are performed. In the Christian faith, a table on which the Eucharist or Holy Communion is offered. Alternative container, an unfinished wood box or non-metal receptacle or enclosure without ornamentation or a fixed interior lining, which is designed for the encasement of human remains and which is made of fiberboard, pressed wood, composite material, with or without an outside covering, or like materials. That was alternative container. Let's see, we don't need a hat. Apostle, certification, legalization of a document for international use under terms of the 1961 Hague Convention. Archbishop, in the Roman Catholic faith, the head of the archdiocese. An aron is a Hebrew word meaning a container, a casket made of entirely wood containing no metal parts. That was an aron. Arrangement conference, the meeting between the funeral director and the client's family during which the funeral arrangements are discussed. Artificial grass, an imitation of grass made in mat form or used at the cemetery to cover the earth around the grave. Basically astroturf. At-need counseling. Counseling with the family as they select the service and items and merchandise and completing arrangements for funeral services of their choice when a death has occurred. That was at-need counseling. Bishop, leader of multiple churches and particular denominations. In the Roman Catholic faith, the head of the diocese. In the LDS Mormon Church, bishop of the ward is leader of a single church. Bronze, the name of... That was not bronze. Bonze, the name of the Buddhist priest. Bonze, the name of the Buddhist priest. Book of dates, a term used in the Buddhist faith to describe a calendar that is used to determine an accurate time for casketing the body. brother. In the Roman Catholic faith, a man who is a member of a religious order without being ordained or while preparing for organizations. Wow, I kind of missed that one. Let's do that one again, because I mixed up the next line below it. In the Roman Catholic faith, the word brother, a man who is a member of a religious order without being ordained or while preparing for ordination. I guess that's like when you're about to become ordained. A brotherhood, relating to a social organization. Burial transit permit. Disposition permit. A legal document issued by a governmental agency authorizing transportation and or disposition of the dead human body. Gotta have these burial transit permits. They're important. Canopy, or a cemetery tent. A portable shelter used to cover the grave area during the committal. Oh, excuse me. Sorry about that. But this is live and it's entertaining. Maybe. Alright. So we're on to the cantor, a religious singer who assists the clergy, assists the rabbi in Jewish faith, and assists the priest in the Eastern Orthodox faith. And we're on to the cardinal. In the Roman Catholic faith, a dignity conferred upon bishops, making them princes of the church. They're the pretty high up people, I think. That those are the ones that wear red, but I don't know. That was a cardinal on his way to heaven. Cash advance. Cash advance items may include, but not limited to, cemetery or crematory services, pallbearer, public transportation, clergy honorarium, flowers, musicians or singers, nurses, obituary notices, gratuities, and death certificates, sometimes called an accommodation or cash disbursement. That was a cash advance. Alright, the casket bearer, or the pallbearer. Typically we know this person carries it. One who actively bears or carries the casket during the funeral service and at the committal service. It's important to tell them what to do also. Celebrant. The officiant who celebrates the Mass in the Roman Catholic Church. I think that celebrant could also be kind of used in the Northwest as a person kind of leading a different type of service for celebration of life or something. But the celebrant in the vocabulary is the person in the Roman Catholic Church. Cemetery, an area of ground set aside and dedicated for the final disposition of a dead human body. Certified copy of a death certificate, a legal copy of the original death certificate. So when the family wants more copies, you gotta get them a certified copy if they're using it for something important, which they should always have one. Okay, I think it's word chancel, C-H-A-N-C-E-L. The portion of the church surrounding the altar, usually enclosing the clergy area behind the altar or communion rail. Chapel, a building or designated area of a building in which services are conducted. So some funeral homes have a chapel in them. The chaplain, a person chosen to conduct religious exercises for the military. The chapel of an institution or a fraternal organization. Institution or a fraternal organization. That was one I did not know. Alright, so then I'm going to type this one and let the computer say it because I am a little lacking in this one. Shevra Kadisha. Let's see if I spell that right. So this is what the computer says.
Chevrakadisha.
Hopefully you can hear that. It's the Hebrew phrase meaning holy society, a group of men or women from a synagogue who care for the dead. They may be referred to in layman's as the washers. In the past, took care of funeral arrangements and preparations for Jewish funerals. So when you have a Jewish washing instead of an embalming, this is who we're talking about.
Chevrakadisha.
Christian burial certificate. Christian burial permit, priest lines, a letter or form from a priest stating the eligibility of a deceased for burial in a Roman Catholic cemetery. My guess is you have to belong to the church, but I really don't know. Columbrium, a structure or space in a mausoleum or other building containing niches, whatever you want to say, or recesses used to hold cremated remains. Committal service, the portion of the funeral that is conducted at the place of disposition of dead human bodies. So the committal service to me would be like when you're at the gravesite and the casket's being lowered in, or you're standing in front of the niche and the urn is being placed in it. That would be the committal service, if I'm correct. Common carrier. Any carrier required by law to convey passengers or freight without refusal if the appropriate fare or charge is paid, like an airlines or a train. So when you're shipping remains, you can often use a common carrier. Contemporary funeral rites. Funeral observance that reflects present-day modern influences in lieu of, or in addition to, or as part of the traditional ceremonies. So we're seeing a lot more contemporary funerals these days instead of your traditional funeral. Coroner, a public officer whose chief duty is to investigate questionable death. Also see medical examiner, which is slightly different. We'll get to that one soon. But the coroner is a public officer whose chief duty is to investigate questionable deaths. Cortege historically refers for funeral processions. So, reference for funeral processions. So when you've got the hearse and you got a whole bunch of cars, it's a cortege. Or maybe you're walking. Cot, a portable stretcher commonly employed in an ambulance or transfer vehicle for the moving of the sick, injured, or deceased. Cremated remains, the result of reduction of a dead body to inorganic bone fragments by intense heat. Those cremated remains. That's the result. Cremation, the reduction of the dead human body to inorganic bone fragments by intense heat in specifically designed retorts. Don't forget, you can only put one body in a retort at a time. No commingling. So the crematory, or crematorium, which sounds a little bit like it's from the 1800s, but the crematory, a furnace or retort for cremated dead human bodies, a building that houses a retort, so where the cremation takes place. A cross, a religious emblem consisting of two bars that intersect at right angles to each other. The crucifier, or the cross bearer, one who carries the crucifix cross during an ecclesiastical procession. I think that means like a fancy church where they lead them into the church and they're holding the cross with Jesus on it. The crucifix, a cross with a figure or image representing the body of Christ. Corpus on it. Crypt, a chamber in a mausoleum generally used to contain the casketed remains of a deceased person. That's the crypt. So, a chamber in a mausoleum. Turn the page. Alright, I hope you guys are sticking with me with this one. Never done this, so like I said, some of my pronunciation might need a little bit of work. Deacon, a subordinate officer in a Christian church, is the deacon, the subordinate officer in a Christian church. A death certificate, A legal document containing vital statistics, disposition, and final medical information pertaining to the deceased. Also, very important paperwork. You can't do much without it. Death notice. A classified notice publicizing a death of a person and giving those details the funeral service and the survivors wish to have published. So this death notice to me is something that might be a little bit shorter and brief, containing the name of the deceased, where they were born, when they died, and who they're survived by. I look at an obituary, and I would call that a little bit more of a life story. So the death notice is a lot shorter, and it's a lot more just direct information about where and when and how. Maybe not how he died, but how the funeral is going to take place. Deceased, a dead human body. Dentures, false teeth. Department of Veterans Affairs, or VA, previously known as Veterans Administration, a federal agency that administers benefits provided by law for veterans of the armed forces. A diocese, or diocese. In the Roman Catholic faith, a geographical grouping of parishes under the judication of the bishop. So I think when the bishop's in charge, he's in charge of a bunch of churches, unless he's a different type of bishop. Direct cremation, disposition of the human remains by cremation without formal viewing, visitation, or ceremony with the body present. Direct disposition. Direct cremation. Well, these terms are kind of similar. So the last one was direct cremation. This one is direct disposition. Any method of disposition of a human remains without a formal viewing, visitation, or ceremony with the body present. So I guess this could include a burial in a cemetery versus just a direct cremation. Dismissal. Leading to an organization departure or invited to leave. It's time to go, it's the dismissal. Divine liturgy. Liturgical celebration of the Eucharist in Eastern Orthodox churches. Alright, here's one for the computer. I struggle with this word. Hang on, guys. Let's see what the computer calls it.
Ecclesiastic.
Ecclesiastic, that's right. Can't remember that. That's a hard one for me. Ecclesiastic, pertaining to the church or clergy. Elegy, a song or poem expressing sorrow or lamentation of the dead. Lamentation? Probably not lamination, that's not right. So that was the elegy. It's a song or a poem. Elder. In a Jehovah's Witness faith, the person who typically conducts the service. Here's another one for the computer. I think it's El Mali Rashamin.
El Male Rakamin.
Don't know who said it right, or if either one of us did. The dog's making noise.
El Male Rakamin.
In the Jewish faith, a memorial service, literally, God full of compassion. Usually the last prayer of the funeral service sometimes refers to as the Mali. Entombment, a place of remains, the placing of remains in a crypt in a mausoleum. So when you're putting the casket in the mausoleum, that's entombment. Epitaph, a commemorative inscription on a tomb or a cemetery marker. So that would be the words that are on the gravestone. the epitaph. The escort. An accompanying as a leader of the procession or guardian of the group, military personnel assigned to accompany the body following an active duty death. Eucharist. The concentrated element of the Holy Communion. So I think that in some churches that could be like the communion wafers and the wine, or perhaps water in other churches if they don't drink wine. Eucharistic minister, a layperson sanctioned to administer the Holy Communion and other assigned tasks. It was the Eucharistic minister. Eulogy, an oration praising an individual, usually after death. So this is when someone gets up and speaks kindly about the person, hopefully. Event planning, process of planning and or coordinating a ceremony or activity. That one's kind of straightforward. Let's see what else we got. Final commendation. In the Roman Catholic faith, the ending portion of the funeral mass is the final commendation. I didn't spend much time going to church, so I didn't learn these words. Forwarding remains. I learned those words. One of the categories required to be itemized on the general price list if the funeral home offers the service. This involves service of the funeral provider in the locale where death occurs and preparation for transfer to another funeral home provider as selected by the family consumer. Funeral rule requires package pricing of this service with a description of the components included. So forwarding the remains could be that you did a first call and then the family decides that they are not going to go with your funeral home and they go somewhere else, and you might end up charging them. Probably won't for that sort of situation, but that's my guess. But other more common ones would be if someone died somewhere and they were on vacation, or they were just living somewhere but they needed to be buried somewhere else, so that would be a more logical reason to forward remains. Fraternal. Relating to a social organization, like a fraternity, I guess. Funeral service. The rites held at the time of disposition of human remains with the body present. Funeral arrangement. A term applied to the completing of the service and financial details of the funeral at the time of need. Funeral liturgy, or funeral mass, the name of the funeral service in the Roman Catholic Church. Alright, we're on to page 13. A few more to go. Funeral procession. The procession of vehicles from a place of the funeral to the place of disposition. So it's kind of like the cortege. That was funeral procession. Procession of vehicles to the place of the funeral. From the place of the funeral to the place of disposition. Funeral rites. Any funeral event performed in a solemn and prescribed manner. So I think that would be kind of following tradition a little bit, or just certain things, like maybe even like a funeral rite could be maybe like putting the pall on in a church that uses those. Funeral service, the rite held at the time of disposition of human remains with the body present. So that's just basically a better term, funeral. But funeral service, we'll add all of it there. Gatha, that's a Buddhist term, I don't know if it's right. The first two and last two verses of a Buddhist hymn sung at a funeral service. General price list, the GPL. This is the thing that you don't want to forget to give out before you start telling anybody about any of the services. The general price list, a printed list of goods and services offered for sale by funeral providers with retail pricing. GPL is considered the keystone of the funeral rule. That's what I meant by you gotta make sure you give it out. Yeah, so it's a printed price list, all the prices and everything that you offer. Don't forget about it. Genuflect. The act of bending the knee as the indication of reverence or as an act of humility. Gratuity. It's also a tip. It's a gift or a small sum of money tendered for services provided. So I think I've been at services where I've seen family tip the grave digger and stuff. I think it's entirely up to the person who wants to give their money away whether or not they tip. And certain businesses don't accept tips, which is fine because it shouldn't be tipped for everything. The grave and excavation in the earth as a place of interment. Graveside service, a funeral service, religious or otherwise, conducted at the grave. A grave strap, the webbing, which is like the strap, the webbing, a similar material used for lowering the casket into the grave. Okay, they're saying here green, not the color green, isn't ecologically friendly. So your green funeral might not have embalming fluid, depending on the cemetery. There might be different restrictions with the types of caskets. Sometimes shrouds are used with the word green, funeral, service, burial, whatever. Okay. Guaranteed contract. One where the funeral home guarantees that the service and the merchandise will be provided at the time of need for an amount not exceeding the original amount of the contract, plus any accruals regardless of the cost provided service merchandise at the time of the funeral. So a guaranteed contract sometimes is talking about pre-needs and when they have to guarantee the price. So you paid it and you guaranteed it. Hesped. In the Jewish faith, a eulogy or true evolution of the deceased's life that is part of the funeral service. Holy water. Water blessed by a priest. Hang on, need some holy water. Honorarium. That was a backup into, I was mentioning honorariums earlier too. Under cash advances. Honorarium, plural honorariums. A normal compensation or recognition for services provided. Sometimes churches don't accept money to the priest or to other people, so an honorarium can be given. Perhaps if the priest isn't allowed to keep it, he'll donate it directly back to the church. That's my guess. Honorary pallbearers, honorary casket bearers. Friends of the family and members of an organization or a group who act as an escort to honor guard for the deceased. They do not carry the casket. This could be maybe some people that walk in front of it, just want to walk with it, or you could even make someone an honorary pallbearer if perhaps maybe their physical condition prevented them from carrying something heavy like a casket. Humanistic funeral. The funeral rite that is, in essence, devoid of religious connotations. So, perhaps for myself, who obviously didn't go to church and learn any of these church words, I would have a humanistic funeral. But, I don't know. Icon. In the Eastern Orthodox faith, a holy picture, usually mosaic or painted on wood. I think an icon in another faith can be like a statue of a religious figure or other things. Iconostation. In Eastern Orthodox Church, the partition that extends across the front of the church, separating the sanctuary from the sole. IHS. The first three letters in the Greek word for Jesus. That was IHS. Imam, ma'am, IMAM. Iman? No. Well, let's make the computer say it. You know, it's a short word, but I can't read everything.
Imam.
Iman. In the Islamic faith, the leader of the local congregation. It's kind of like Islam, Imam. Kind of almost rhyme a little bit. Alright. Immediate burial. Disposition of human remains by burial without formal viewing, visitation, or ceremony with the body present, except for the graveside service. So immediate burial, we're not going to, maybe like a funeral home picks up the body and they say, we don't have time for a funeral, or maybe it's just one person that's going to attend because they didn't know anyone else. So they go for immediate burial and they go right to the graveside and they're buried. Maybe someone attends, maybe they don't. Informant. One who supplies the vital statistical information concerning the deceased. Oftentimes this will be the next of kin or a very close relative or a friend of the family. INRI. The abbreviation for the Latin term meaning Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Inhume. I've never heard that one. Inter. To bury in the ground. Interment. Burial. Inhumation. The act of placing the dead body in the ground. Words are really, really similar. Inurnment. Key word there, urn in the middle of that. Inurnment. The act of placing cremains, I don't like cremains, I like cremated remains, in an urn. Act of placing cremated remains in niche or grave. Irrevocable contract. A contract for future funeral services which cannot be terminated or cancelled prior to death of the beneficiary. Irrevocable contract. I don't know about that. Islam. The religion of Muslims that began at the time of Muhammad. Muslims believe that Islam stands for purity, peace, submission to God, Allah, will, and obedience to His law. That was Islam, so it's the religion of the Muslims that believe in their God, Allah. Alright, keeping going, page 14 here. Looks like we're getting there. We've got how many more pages? Several. Alright. Janaza? I don't know.
Janazah.
In the Islamic faith, the funeral or funeral prayer. Kaddish. Kaddish. In the Jewish faith, the prayer recited for the deceased by the direct mourners, parents, siblings, spouse, and children. For the first time at the conclusion of the interment service, it is subsequently recited by children for parents at every service for 11 months. All other categories of mourners have the obligation to say the Kaddish for 30 days. It's complicated, but whatever makes people happy. The Kever, Kever, Jewish faith, the grave. The Kivura, in the Jewish faith, the burial. Kin, one's relative, refers to blood relation. Legally, the surviving spouse is not kin. Kingdom Hall, the appropriate term for worship facilities for the Jehovah's Witness, is the Kingdom Hall. The Quran, the holy book of Islamic faith, revealed to Muhammad by the angel Gabriel. Alright, one more for the computer. I think it's Kriya. Kriya, maybe. Hebrew word meaning rendering or tearing, a symbol of grief, a tear in the upper corner of the garment tear, or a tear on a symbolic ribbon which is worn by the survivors. Lavea, in the Jewish faith, the funeral procession. Liturgical, Eucharist-centered worship, a prescribed order or form of worship specific to a particular denomination which will have a Eucharist or Holy Communion is centered as its central element. Liturgical, to me, also is when they're following really strict rubric, and kind of maybe when you go to church you're seeing the same thing, and it's like the opposite of non-liturgical, which means that they might, like, before they lead the church service, they might decide what's something relevant in the Bible, and then they read out of it, where the other ones, they follow these really specific ways of doing things. Liturgical. Lot. A subdivision of a cemetery that consists of several graves or interment spaces. So if you bought a family area for all of you, it could be called a lot when you're buying it. Lowering device. A mechanical device that used to lower caskets into the ground. Bakura Gayo. Traditionally in the Buddhist faith, add bedside prayer, which may now be performed by the bonze just before funeral arrangements are made. Mass. The liturgical celebration of the Eucharist in the Roman Catholic Church. Mass card. Spiritual banquet. Bouquet. A document indicating the offering of a Mass for a specific intention. So the Mass card could be maybe like Christmas Mass. I don't know. It just says you came here to have Christmas Mass. Don't quote me on that. Muslims. Sorry, that was terrible reading. Mausoleum. A building containing crypts or vault for entombment. Medical examiner. A forensically trained physician whose duty is to investigate questionable or unintended deaths, has replaced the coroner in some states. Sometimes there's coroners and medical examiners in different states. It just depends. Memorial folder or service folder, a pamphlet made available at the funeral service giving details about the deceased and the funeral arrangements. That would kind of tell you what's going on. It might, maybe it could include a map to the cemetery, or it could say the viewings in the morning and come back and we'll have the interment after the cremation. Memorial gathering, a scheduled assembly of a family and friends following a death. Memorial park, a cemetery or section of the cemetery with only flush to the ground markers. I often tend to see these memorial parks that look like big, huge open lawns, and I think it has to do with perhaps mowing the lawn. Memorial service, funeral rites with the body not present. So memorial service, the body is not present. Menorah, in the Jewish faith, a candelabrum, which sent a central stem burning 7 candles. Wow, now that I read that, let's go back and say it again. It's a menorah. It's the oldest symbol in Judaism. So it has 7 candles. It has one that's higher. Some menorahs are different. There's traditional menorahs and there's non-traditional menorahs. A traditional menorah, from my understanding, the one candle is up higher and then the other ones are down lower and they're all in a straight line. The non-traditional menorah might have the candles like this. Military escort. Military personnel assigned to accompany a body following an active duty death. Which I think that's pretty neat. They stick with their guys and make sure the full respect is given to the deceased while it's on its journey back to the final resting place. Okay, so the Star of David, or the Mogen David, in the Jewish faith, a hexagram formed by the combination of 2 triangles, may be called the Jewish star. It symbolizes a new hope for Jewish people. Muhammad, a prophet of Islamic religion, born 571 CE, considered by Muslims to be God's messenger, but not worshipped or considered to be divine. That was Muhammad, who was God's messenger. Monsignor, an honorary title conferred upon a priest. And then I have the hiccups. Alright. I don't know if I said that right. Back to what I said. Monsignor, an honorary title conferred upon a priest. A mosque. A local church building contains no icons, statues, symbols, pews, chairs, or musical instruments. Sounds kind of like a quiet place. I wouldn't mind that. A Muslim, the name given to a member of the Islamic faith. A narthex, lobby, vestibule, foyer, the entryway into funeral home or church. It's kind of that like area right as you walk in. Alright, 3 more pages to go, guys. I know this has been about 45 minutes so far, but we are trying to pass our exam, so let's keep going. National Cemetery. The cemetery created and maintained under the Act of Congress for burial of veterans of military services and their eligible family members. Nave, the seating or auditorium section of a church. So after you go through the narthex, get to the nave where you can have a seat. Niche, depends on how you want to say it. A recess or a space in a columbarium used for the permanent placing of cremated remains. So, Nirvana, the Buddhist idea of heavenly place or pure land. Non-guaranteed contract, one in which the funeral home only agrees that the amount prepaid plus an accrual will be credited to the balance due. However, the price of the funeral will be whatever the current price is for the service and merchandise at the time of the death occurs. It was a non-guaranteed contract. Could go up in price. Perhaps some things don't, and some things do. Non-liturgical, scripture-centered, like I mentioned earlier, a form or order of worship which has the scripture as its central element. The actual form or order of the worship service is left to the discretion of each individual church and the minister. So this is kind of when they decide what to talk about. Maybe they're going to speak about current events and how following their beliefs will help you with getting through them. Obituary. A news item concerning the death of a person, which usually contains biographical sketch. So unlike the death notice, the obituary is a little bit more thought out and has details that hopefully will make people grasp a little bit more about the person who passed. Okay, gotta type this on.
Obsequies.
Obsequies? I don't know. Funeral rite or burial ceremonies. I don't know if that word was the right word. Officiant. One who conducts a religious service or ceremony. Outer burial container. Any container which is designed for placement in the grave around the casket, including but not limited to containers commonly known as burial vaults, grave boxes, and grave liners. So the outer burial container, oftentimes something that cemeteries require. It helps the cemetery from caving in when the lawnmowers drive over them. Caved in. Not with an outer burial container, it won't be. Pagoda, a Buddhist place of worship. Pall, symbolic cloth covering placed over the casket. And it means that everybody is equal in death, I believe. Because you all get a white thing over you and nobody looks different at the services. Pallbearer, one who actively bears or carries the casket during the funeral service at the committal service. So they're going to help through the church, if there is a church used, or help them carry the casket from the funeral home to the hearse, and the hearse to the grave. Aristus. Vigil service associated with Eastern Orthodox faith. Once again, don't know the pronunciation. Paschal candle. In the Roman Catholic faith, a candle placed near the casket during the funeral mass that signifies the everlasting light of Christ. Pastor. One having spiritual care over a number of people. Perpetual care. An arrangement made by the cemetery whereby funds are set aside, the income from which is used to maintain the cemetery plot indefinitely. So perpetual care, they got to keep the cemetery going. You don't just want to bury someone there and then see that the cemetery closed the next day. That would be upsetting. So perpetual care keeps it going. They've been charging that for a long time. The Pope, the head of the Roman Catholic Church, and the Bishop of Rome. Prayer card. A card with the name of the deceased and the prayer or verse which may or may not include the date, birth date, and death. Pre-funded funeral arrangements. Those funeral arrangements made in advance of need that includes provisions for funding or prepayment. Yeah, so pre-funded funeral arrangements, they've paid for part of it already. Pre-planned funeral arrangements. Those funeral arrangements made in advance of the need do not include provisions for funding or prepayment. So you could have pre-funded and pre-planned. You could pay for it all and pre-plan it. Prayer rails, kneeling, the kneeling rail. I like to try to remember prayer do, even though that's not the right way to say it, because you doing your prayers on the rail. But that's just my silly way of remembering it. Might work for you. Priest, a title conferred by ordination. So the priest was ordained, not ordinary. Private carrier, those who transport only in particular instances and only for those they choose to contract with funeral home vehicles and livery. So, the procession, or processional, the movement in an orderly fashion at the beginning of a service. A rabbi, teacher, or ordained leader of the Jewish faith. The reader, in a Church of Christ, scientist. Sometimes I think there's typos in this book. Reader, in the Church of Christ, scientist, one authorized to read the lessons in scriptures. Receiving remains. One of the categories required to be itemized on a general price list, and the funeral provider offers the service. This involves services of the funeral provider after initial services have been provided by another firm at the location of the death. Funeral rites require package pricing of the service with the description of the components included. So that was receiving remains. So back when we were reading about forwarding remains, the one funeral home would forward the remains, and they might have a fee for that, and then the next funeral home might have a fee for receiving them, which could include the person going to the airport who picked the body up, or something in that sort of situation where there was money needing to be made. Okay. Receiving vault. A structure so designed for temporary storage of bodies that are not to be immediately interred. So I think like receiving vaults, sometimes when I grew up in Alaska, there was a lot of the time where you weren't going to be able to dig a hole in the ground because the ground was completely frozen solid, so they might actually hold a casket or remains in a different area until they're able to dig and place the body there. Processional, the movement in an orderly fashion at the end of a service. So processional in the beginning and recessional at the end. Registration book or memorial book, a book signed by those attending a visitational service. Retort, the burial chamber in a cemetery. Crematory. The retort was the... Wow, let me start over. The retort, the burning chamber in a crematory. I think I need new glasses. Recoverable contract. A contract which may be terminated by the purchaser at any time prior to the death of the beneficiary with the refund of the monies paid on the contract as prescribed by the law. So I think a revocable contract would probably be a good idea because maybe you change your mind. Or you marry someone into a different religion and you have different beliefs, so you change your mind. You won't lose your money. Rosary beads. Beads and a crucifix used as an aid in the recitation of prayer. Rosary prayer. Prayer recited in order at a rosary or vigil service. Royal doors. Doors in the center of the iconoclast leading directly to the altar. Only ordained clergy are to go through these doors. Never cross on the sole in front of the royal doors. Rubrics. In liturgical churches, states directions in a prayer book or liturgical manual regarding the order of the service as approved by the denomination. So the rubric is the guide that they follow. Tells them when to do what prayers and when to have the Eucharist. Sacrament of the sick. In the Roman Catholic faith, the sacrament given to those seriously ill or in danger of death to prepare their souls for eternity. Sacred Heart. In the Roman Catholic faith, a religious picture of Jesus Christ showing his radiant heart. It's the Sacred Heart. Sanctuary. The part of the church about the altar inside the chancel. This term may also be used to describe the area of the church where people sit for their services. Scapular. In the Roman Catholic faith, the priest or the piece of cloth, not priest, right, scapular. In the Roman Catholic faith, a piece of cloth or metal having religious significance, usually worn around the neck. Section, the largest subdivision of the cemetery. So you have like the right section and the left section, maybe. Probably a little bit more detail than that. Service of encasketing. In the Buddhist faith, the service performed as part of the casketing of the body. Sexton, one who is in charge of the cemetery, the caretaker of the church. Shabbat, a Jewish Sabbath. Christi begins at sundown Friday, Sabbath. Shabbat. Okay, so it ends on Saturday. Sorry about that one. Shiva. In the Jewish faith, 7-day mourning period. Or Shiva. I'm not sure. Sheholashim, meaning 30 days in the Jewish faith, the 30-day mourning period. Shomer, in the Jewish faith, a watcher who sits with the body until burial, which they usually bury right away, so they're not sitting there for a long time. Shroud, a cloth or garment in which a dead person is wrapped or dressed for burial. Sometimes the shroud could be used in a green burial instead of a casket. Sign of the cross, a symbolic sign of the cross made with the right hand. I'm not going to do it because I don't know how. But I've probably seen it done before. A sister, or a nun. In the Roman Catholic faith, a woman who is a member of the religious order, especially one bound by vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. So I think she's saying I'll be good and follow faith. The sister and then Social Security Administration, a branch of the U.S. Department of Human Health and Human Services, which provides benefits for retirement retirement survivors, insurance, disability, health insurance, and death. Social Security Administration. So this is where you get help. So lay, in the Eastern Orthodox Church, an open area sometimes raised before the altar. Survivors, one who outlives another person or lives through an event. Synagogue, a place of religious worship in the Jewish faith, may also be referred to as a temple. Alright. One more for the computer, guys. We got one more page to go. Tech.
Totrachim.
Totrachim? Maybe. A hand-sewn white linen shroud in which the deceased member of the Jewish faith are dressed. Alright. few more of these to go. Thanks for working through this with me. Wait till we get to medical terminology. Then I really won't be able to pronounce these things, but I'll give it my best. Tahara. In the Jewish faith, the ceremony of washing the deceased before the burial. Service as a ritual purification of cleansing the body and shroud be performed by the Shevra Kadisha. So, this is the process. The Tahara is the actual process of the washing. It's performed by the washer. Talith, a prayer shawl worn by men during the morning prayer service in the Jewish faith. Tehillim. In the Jewish faith, prayer said before the funeral by a group of friends and shomer. These prayers come from the Book of Psalms. Temple ordinance. Ceremonial instructions of the Mormon Church, given only within a temple to worthy members of the sect. I don't know who the worthy people are, but it's probably people that go to church a lot. Third-party contract. Contract which involves a funeral director, funeral home, because family being served has contracted with someone else, third party, for services or merchandise also available from the funeral home, i.e. caskets, vaults, urns, pre-need insurance, etc. Okay, so the tomb, in a general term designating those places suitable for the reception of a dead human body. Transept, a wing of the main part of the church which may serve as a small chapel for baptism, weddings, and even small funeral services. Transfer of remains. Removal, first call. The moving of the dead human body from the place of death to the funeral home or other designated places. Transfer vehicle. The automobile generally used for transportation to transporting the dead uncasketed body from the place of death to the mortuary. Oftentimes, from what I've seen, these can be kind of a little more simple looking vehicles, so you might not, or like a black Suburban, or something that doesn't say funeral home all over it. It might say a little bit, but I don't know. Trishagon. In the Eastern Orthodox faith, 3 short services or blessings that are part of the funeral rite. Trust account. Account established by one individual to be held for the benefit of another, creating a fiducial responsibility as a method of payment of funeral expenses. Money paid to the funeral home for future services is planned in an account with the funeral home as trustee for the benefit of another. So if you prepay your funeral, they're put in a trust account, it grows interest, and then later down the road, the funeral home uses that money for your funeral, or the funeral it was intended for. Vestments. Ritual garments worn by the clergy. Veterans. One who has served a prescribed period of time with the armed forces and who is no longer a member of the armed forces. So someone that was in a branch of the military and is not in the branch of the military anymore, as long as they were good when they left. Vigil lights. In the Roman Catholic faith, a set of 2 candles that may be placed, one at the head and one at the foot of the casket during a visitation period. Visitation, calling hours, visiting hours. Time set aside for friends and relatives to pay respect for the deceased prior to the funeral service. Vital statistics. The collection, tabulation, and interpretation of data concerning birth, marriage, divorce, sickness, and death. Vital statistics are something you could get during arrangement and also during first call. Wake. Historically, a watch kept over deceased and all-night vigil, wake service, vigil service, rosary service. In a Roman Catholic faith, a prayer or scripture service usually held at the funeral home, the event before a funeral mass. Words of appreciation. The brief expression of gratitude to the congregation for their presence at the Buddhist service. Yaharzit. Let's try that one.
Yarzid,
Yarzid. In the Jewish faith, the anniversary of the death.
Yarmulke,
Yarmulke, maybe. In the Jewish faith, the skull cap worn by the men at temple services and funeral services. Yarmulke is a little bit easier one, but Yarmulke, maybe it's more specific about just the funeral service? I'm not sure. And last word of the day for my vocabulary reading. Yizkor.
Yusker,
In the Jewish faith, a memorial service recited 4 times a year. Alright, guys. Thank you for listening to me talk for over an hour. Hopefully, I didn't butcher those words terribly, and most of all, I hope that when it comes time to study a lot more for your funeral exam boards, you'll be able to play this and it will help you because it helped me. Thank you.